Hello there and a very good evening to all our viewers joining us here on Vantage Point. I'm your host Zulfiq Farzan, and today we will be discussing several important aspects in Sri Lanka as well as the world, something that the world has been waiting for, possible world peace following the talks between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. To discuss all these matters, we have with us today Dr. Dayan Jatilaka. Very good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Zulfiq.
Doctor, before we proceed with any of the politics, local and international, there's a very important question that I want to pose to you.
Okay.
So it's been rumored that you are going to be the next Sri Lankan ambassador to Russia. Is there any truth to this?
Well, I was invited to take the post by President Sirisena, and I readily accepted the invitation with the blessings, endorsement and encouragement of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. I've been nominated for the post. I have not yet been appointed to the post. Had I been appointed to the post, I would have sought an appointment with your chairperson, Mr. Raj Mahendran, to thank him for the 5 years, almost 5 years that we had this program.
Indeed.
The two programs, Kshitija and Vantage Point, August 2013. So I would have made that appointment. I haven't as yet because I have not been appointed to the post. I've been nominated for the post.
But you're ready to accept that post?
Yes, I am.
Then, Doctor, from Vantage Point and from the entire Capital Maharaj organization, we wish you all the success when you get that appointment.
Thank you. Thank you. It'll be nice to get back to diplomacy. I've served as ambassador twice, and it'll be good to make it a hat trick.
A hat trick in diplomatic service. So, while wishing the doctor the very best in his future, let's start off by talking about Sri Lankan politics.
Yeah.
Doctor, now the Sri Lankan political sphere is moving in a very weird direction.
Yeah.
We've heard that the group of 16 wants one thing, the Podujana Perumuna wants one thing, the UNP wants something else completely. And while they're making all these statements, we are heading into possible provincial council elections at the end of the year. With the current political situation, Doctor, is it wise to have a provincial council election right now? And also, if it is, how fair would it be on the voters?
Well, I think it's very unwise not to. I've never known the postponement or non-holding of elections in any country at any time to be a good thing. I'm not saying that elections should be held every year or every other month. What I'm saying is the non-holding of elections on schedule never helped anybody because steam just builds up. There's no place for it to be released. People don't know when there would be an election. So it builds up and either it explodes or it manifests itself in dark ways, such as the rise of ethno-religious extremism of one sort or another. I do hope that the long overdue provincial council elections will be held, I wouldn't say on schedule because it's behind schedule, would be held this year. If there is to be a soft landing 18 months from now at the presidential election. Because if they don't hold elections, and we've seen this in Sri Lanka over and over again, the government that does not hold elections in time suffers the consequence, and that's not a huge consideration for me, but the country and the citizens suffer those consequences too.
Doctor, what about the cost now? We just had the local government polls, a massive cost with the number of candidates from 4,000 to 8,000 plus. That's an additional amount, an additional burden of tax on the people right there, because they'll be paying for these public representatives to function on their behalf. One election and then possibly another election. So the cost also, Doctor, I think there should be some sort of mechanism to control it.
Well, the cost is because they fiddled around with the local authorities' system and it ballooned. That's why you didn't know who actually, you knew who won, which side won. but you didn't know who had been elected and who was going to sit there for a long time.
And who would be establishing power in that council?
Absolutely. So the councils got out of control, and that's because many parties got together and tinkered with it. Basically, the government and its allies of that moment, the JVP. So it's not the fault of holding elections; it's the fault of fiddling with the system. And speaking of fiddling, the monies that the people have had to pay out have also been because of the central bank bond scam, which your station has been focusing on, and the budgetary policies such as the burden of new taxes. So it's not a fault of democracy, it's not a fault of holding elections, it's the fault of bad policy.
And the system.
The system works, but the system is dysfunctional now because of bad policies.
Would you also agree, Doctor, the system is dysfunctional because of the individuals appointed to the system?
Yes, but look, I mean, I'm a political scientist, and I look at things according to my training in terms of comparative global politics. And when I look around the third world, and not even the third world, I mean, when I look at Italy today, I mean, I'm happy that they've thrown the establishment out, but they haven't been able to form a government, and there's going to be a new election very soon. So when I look at Sri Lanka, I see a state, a system that has survived. It has survived a war waged by terrorism. It has survived a southern terrorist uprising, in fact 2. It has survived a foreign military presence. It has rolled that presence back. Democracy has survived, however flawed. To me, the Sri Lankan state and the Sri Lankan system, the bureaucracy, the economy, they work. They work. The legal system works. The dysfunctionalities are when the software is wrong, when bad policies are fed in. The same people under with different policies, they work better. So I would focus as a political scientist, my problem is with public policy rather than with the system as it is, because the system has worked.
The system has worked according to your views.
Looking at it comparatively. I mean, I look at Pakistan, I look at Afghanistan, I look around the world. Even the United States, we have a better social welfare system when it comes to health care than the United States. So I'm not saying this is the best country in the world, but the system is not yet broken. It's dysfunctioning. There's gridlock. But the system hasn't broken. You don't need some drastic new type of leadership to correct the system. We mustn't overreact. What you need is the right leadership and the right policies.
The right leadership and the right policies. Some wise thoughts there by Dr. Dayan Jatilaka. We will be continuing this discussion. It's getting very interesting, so do join us after this short commercial break. Welcome back to Vantage Point. We were discussing the system here in Sri Lanka, but at the same time, there's something really interesting happening around the world. On Tuesday, 12th of June 2018, a historic day for the entire world. 2 world leaders on either ends of the globe met in one place at the same time. They have not met before, and they did not meet each other's eye, and they were trading very aggressive words on Twitter as a provocation of war, according to some experts. I'm talking about Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Finally, Dr. Dayan Jatilaka, finally, a North Korean leader has agreed for a sit-down with the leader of the United States of America. You've been a seasoned diplomat. You've seen so many leaders come and go, so many meetings take place. This meeting, Doctor, how historic is it according to you? Please enlighten us.
It's major. It's big, or as Donald Trump used to say, it's huge.
It's huge.
As Winston Churchill, who was one of the finest wartime leaders, that the world is known, said jaw jaw is better than war war. So it is a good thing, it's a wonderful thing that two very controversial leaders, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, actually met
Without nuking each other.
and talked without hurling insults at each other. But it doesn't mean that things will go smoothly from now on. There are very serious issues such as denuclearization, especially because the United States has walked out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Yes.
So the North Koreans would wonder what happens if the next president walks out on any deal that they arrive at with President Trump. So the ice is a little thin, is more than a little thin because of Iran. But then it is because he walked out of the Iran deal that President Trump is more likely to cut a generous deal with North Korea, because he needs to show a success, and that is North Korea's moment. It's an opportunity to get the sanctions reduced, get the sanctions off, and thereby regrow the North Korean economy. But then the North Koreans don't know how long it's going to last. Circular argumentation back to Iran. So you have to understand Korea in relation to Iran. The difference here is that the South Korean president is deeply committed to the success of normalization between the two halves of Korea, and he has been a very good partner for peace. The Americans know that even without them, South Korea, the South Korean leadership, will move along the path of peace together with North Korea. And they have the most to lose if this doesn't succeed. So I think thanks to the two Korean leaders, there's a slightly better chance of this succeeding than Iran at this point in time.
Doctor, I was recently having a conversation with a few people about this Korean matter and the peace, so-called peace talks. Now it's dubbed as the peace talks. One question that was posed to me was, how fair is it to ask North Korea to completely denuclearize, one of the Trump administration requests or demands to denuclearize, while the US still has its own nuclear arsenal, the UK has its own nuclear arsenal, India is test firing nuclear missiles in the Indian Ocean. So how fair is it to ask North Korea?
It's not fair at all. It's not fair at all, especially after what happened in Libya. You see, the Libyans under Gaddafi dismantled its nuclear program in good faith. Their main partner was Tony Blair. And what happened at the end of the day? At the end of the day, Gaddafi was lynched.
By
his
own
convoy
people.
was attacked, and he was lynched by a group allied with the West. So why would anybody give up their nuclear weapons program when that's what happens down the road? You have two bad examples. Libya, where they gave up the program and Gaddafi wound up dead, and Iran, where the United States has walked out of the deal, though the Europeans and Russia and China are remaining very much on board. Now the United States has threatened those countries with sanctions, or rather their companies with sanctions, if they continue to invest in Iran. So mixed signals from the United States. Of course, every country does have discrepancies, contradictions in their practice depending on which country they're dealing with. But this is something different. You have a certain model. You're saying, look, you denuclearize, this is what you get, the pluses. If you do not, you get sanctions. Now, that makes sense. But when the United States itself walks out of the Iran deal, when the West actually killed Gaddafi or invaded or intervened in such a manner that he died and that country has been pretty much destroyed, then any rational player, now the North Koreans are supposed to be irrational, but they behave quite rationally,
Except on Twitter.
in the recent past, except on Twitter.
Twitter.
So, the North Koreans must be asking ourselves, why should we throw this card away? Now, they've agreed to denuclearize, but, you know, that's a kind of a pious statement. They've already destroyed one of their test sites.
Yes.
So, they are willing to walk down that road, but they will want guarantees which ensure that what happened to Libya won't happen to them and what happened to Iran won't happen. You know, American politics, well, Western politics, is quite volatile. It is to do with, it's media driven, it's to do with public opinion. These are democracies, but democracies which are functioning in a more irregular way in recent years than before. Now, the West has been democratic for hundreds of years. The Russians and the Chinese knew that when they signed a deal with the West in the past, that the West would pretty much keep to that deal. But in recent years, even the deals with Russia have been unwound by Western administrations, which is why President Putin has been reacting. Because the understandings and the agreements arrived at in the 1970s and the 1980s have been have been really upended from the time of President George Bush Jr., not his father. This is the kind of Republican extremism that has been propelled by elements of the Republican base. Now, that base is a little different from the Republican Party of Nixon and Reagan, where you could sign a deal and you knew that the deal would stick. But as the religious right became more influential in the Republican Party, Republican administrations became more volatile. So too the Democratic administrations for different reasons. There, it's the liberal base that has been pushing policy. And therefore, from the Clinton administration onwards, there has been volatility. Take Libya. President Obama did not want to intervene. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates did not want to intervene. But Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and two key personalities, Samantha Power and Susan Rice, were the ones who drove the Libyan intervention, egged on by the French and the British. So, American politics, I mean, President Obama went along reluctantly. It was pushed by his Secretary of State. Now, that's the new type of politics in the West, be it under Republicans or Democrats, which puts other countries like Russia, like China. The Chinese are really too big for the Americans to play around with too much, too big economically. But when it's a country like North Korea, they have to wonder what happens if we get into this in good faith and there's a change of government, or there's an editorial in a newspaper, or Fox News runs something and then the president decides that the deal is off.
So, it's something like the Western politics versus the rest of the world. Doctor, this is a very interesting topic that we're having. We'll discuss this soon after this short commercial break. Welcome back to Vantage Point. We were discussing about the most historic summit in the world up to date, the Kim and Trump summit. Doctor, before we move on to a more local aspect, this summit, we discussed how important it is, how the Western political world works with the rest of the world. Now, if this summit is to go ahead, now it's going on, if there is a good positive outcome in the coming days where North Korea says, okay, we agree to some of the terms that you're saying, we'll denuclearize, but you give us a guarantee, how far is it going to work for the rest of the world?
Well, I think it'll be a good thing for Asia, because the stakes were very high. You have Japan next door, the Korean Peninsula, which would have been devastated had there been a clash. It's not just a nuclear clash, Zulfi. The North Koreans have huge amounts of heavy artillery, and even a conventional war would have been totally devastating. So, if things move forward, it is good. The problem is how to make sure that it's sustainable, given what has happened concerning Libya and also Iran.
Doctor, what about Iraq?
Iraq, I mean, after the Cold War ended, Zulfiq, we had a serious problem. The Cold War, bad as it was, provided a certain balance. That's why I'm happy if I get the chance of going to Moscow. I've been to Moscow many times before, but I'm happy because at this time you can see that Russia under Putin is playing the role of a balancing factor in world politics. But after the Cold War, the West thought that it had nobody that it should concern itself with. And therefore, it didn't have to be prudent. It didn't have to be careful. It didn't even have to be realistic. So, Iraq is an example. What happened was that Al-Qaeda, based in Afghanistan, attacked the United States. The United States hit back. Fine, understandable, justifiable. The whole world was supporting the United States on that. But what did the US do? Halfway through that war, it decided to attack Iraq.
So there was WMD.
So there was WMD. So now that's the kind of thinking that even a Republican like President George Bush Sr. would never have done. Because the Cold War had not quite ended during his time. He was playing by the rules. The West thought that it could rewrite all the rules of the global game, any which way they wanted. So you had these disasters in the Middle East. I mean, before the Middle East, it started with former Yugoslavia. They got away with that because you didn't have a reassertive Russia. If Putin had been around, that's not the way things would have gone down in former Yugoslavia. But starting with former Yugoslavia, it is a question of rewriting the world order. That didn't quite work. So you have countries like Iraq, Libya, destroyed, devastated, and extremism having surfaced. The Iraqis are lucky now because the Iranians, whom the Americans and the Israelis have a huge problem with, the Iranians helped to stabilize Iraq.
Yes.
The Shiite militia fighting alongside the Iraqi armed forces against ISIL very successfully have been pro-Iranian. So, it is Iran that has moved in to stabilize countries that have been destabilized by Western intervention, which destroyed the state structure, which provided stability.
Doctor, speaking of Western intervention, there was a very interesting article published on one of the websites here in Sri Lanka about the US not wanting Gotabaya Rajapaksa in politics.
Well, it's not the business of the United States. But I did see this article, and it's not on a local website. I wouldn't have taken it seriously had it been on a local website. It was on a web blog run by one of the most distinguished journalists that we have alive. He doesn't live in Sri Lanka, he lives in Toronto. DBS Jairaj. Jairaj's weblog carries a story which says that outgoing US Ambassador Atul Keshap paid a call on former President Rajapaksa, a courtesy call which lasted 90 minutes. Now, this is true, I mean, it's a fact. The rest of it, I don't know how true it is, but since Jairaj carries it, I tend to believe that it's true. It says that Ambassador Keshap said very clearly that the West, especially the United States, has serious misgivings about a Gotabaya candidacy. He's supposed to have said that triumphing over terrorism with an iron fist is a good thing, but that is no qualification to lead a democracy, and that the United States and the West would like to see a mature democratic leader becoming the presidential candidate of the Rajapaksa camp. I think the West knows that there's going to be governmental change. So they're trying to shape the outcome. And I think they've drawn a red line. Now, of course, Mahinda Rajapaksa is not obligated to stick within the red line, but he's also a realist. He's a pragmatist. And he will not want to start off with a clash with the West by picking somebody. If the West has said very clearly, look, we don't want him for these reasons, President Rajapaksa knows that these are guys who can make trouble for him.
Doctor, speaking of this, very quickly, before we wrap up this program, how fair is it to allow the West to decide the country?
Absolutely unfair. They have no right to make that kind of statement if they made the statement. However, this is the real world.
It would seem very unfair on the people of the country.
Absolutely, it's a sovereign choice. But what politics teaches you, what the realist school of politics to which I belong, politics and international relations, teaches you is that yes, they don't have the right to say it, but if you choose to defy, you must be ready to face the consequences of that defiance. Now, there are countries which can do that, like Cuba. But we are not Cuba. We are also on India's doorstep. We don't have to comply with what the Indians say either, but we have to be ready, we have to examine whether we have the capability to confront. Now, I don't think we have the capabilities to sustain a confrontation, but that doesn't mean that I think we should comply. That's why I think that Lord Buddha and Aristotle were completely correct when they advocated a middle path in the case of Lord Buddha and the golden mean in the case of Aristotle. Now, I think President Rajapaksa, being a very, very mature political leader, must be calculating and calibrating. He's not in trouble because he can either run Gotabaya irrespective of what the West says, or he's got Chama Rajapaksa. There was a good witticism by Dallas Alhaperuma the other day in Sinhalese. He said, look, name a letter of the English alphabet, we've got somebody who can be the candidate, for each letter of the alphabet.
Do they have someone from Z?
Oh, that's a good question. But they certainly have the C's, they have the B's, the C's, the D's, the G's. You've got Basil, he may not be very popular. You've got Chama, who's a consensus builder. And outside the family, you've got Dinesh. So, Mahinda Rajapaksa is not a man without options. He's not a man without choices. Though, unfortunately, Professor G.L. Pires seems to have ruled out, though I don't know whether he has the right and the power to rule out President Sirisena, because I think Mahinda Rajapaksa will make his decision at the right time in accordance with the balance of forces as he sees it. He will calculate. But right now, there looks like there is a problem. According to that news report on dbsjraj.com, the outgoing US ambassador has even said something about the American citizenship, which I thought wouldn't be a problem because, get a good lawyer, you can renounce your citizenship. But the report says that unless and until certain war crimes allegations or human rights allegations are clear, now I think those are all bogus. I think that they're fake. But the Americans do have a card to play. Somebody in the Tamil diaspora or even some American human rights organization can file a case in an American court. I think that's what they're signaling President Rajapaksa, former President Rajapaksa, saying, look, this is not uncomplicated because there are these issues and somebody can throw a spanner in the legal works and then we are going to have this protracted legal process which is going to take time.
So the question is, next year we will have a situation where the people in the country will have to make a very, 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 and I emphasize one more very wise decision. And that right is up to you, our viewers. Until next time, it's good night from the Newsfirst team.